In my past life, Ethan had mistaken me for a boy from the very start. He deliberately caused me to fall and become crippled, just to make the girl beside him cry. Who told her to always be so indifferent and cold? To compensate, the He family took me in from the traveling circus. Only then did Ethan realize I was a girl, and his attitude instantly reversed, becoming gentle and considerate. I also learned that the girl was his adopted sister, and their relationship was extremely strained. No matter how close Ethan was to me, she remained indifferent, which infuriated Ethan to no end. Until she witnessed Ethan proposing to me, that impassive face suddenly shed tears. Ethan immediately pushed me away, embraced her, and the two lovers finally found happiness. Afraid that my presence would make the girl jealous, he kicked me out of the house despite the pouring rain. I developed a high fever from being soaked in the rain and was unable to move freely. In the end, I was dragged into an alley by a drunken man, where I was violated and left to die. When I opened my eyes again, I had been reborn back to the very beginning. This time, I completed the performance, landing perfectly. But I continued to pretend to be a boy, holding flowers as I walked towards Ethan's box seat. Then, I gave the flowers to the stunned girl beside him, making her fall head over heels for me. 1. Flowers, for you. I turned my head, scratching my ear-length black hair, my face flushed. They match your dress very well. Hearing this, the girl's brown eyes, which had been quietly lowered, looked up and widened slightly. She looked at the gardenias in my hand, then at the white dress she was wearing. She subconsciously reached out to take them. But she was interrupted by Ethan and the overturned dishes he slammed over. Where did this stray dog come from, daring to bark in front of me? Get out! The soup from the dishes splashed onto me, scalding like molten iron. But I didn't flinch at all. Instead, I looked worriedly at the girl, who had also been splashed, and handed her a handkerchief. Here. This made Ethan even angrier. He snatched the flowers and threw them at my face. I told you to get out. The petals fluttered, along with the whip-like stems, falling at my feet. The hazy feeling of rebirth finally faded, and genuine pain and coldness permeated the fragrance of the flowers. I remembered that today was Ethan's 17th birthday. My troupe and I, the young acrobats, had been invited to perform for entertainment. And I had performed the human pyramid stunt countless times. Every time I stepped on my fellow performers' shoulders, climbing the tower formed by their bodies, the stage lights above felt like a reachable sun. Hot, scalding, impossible to look directly at. I often thought, how nice it would be to have a shadow to block it. But when that shadow actually flew over, the impact was no less than a bullet. Even though it was just a gardenia with its stem and leaves. In my past life, when I fell from the 4-person high pyramid, I landed in a pile of snow-white gardenia petals. Ethan, who had thrown the flower, was clapping and laughing in the audience. And from then on, I could no longer leave the wheelchair, and in the end, I was dragged into an alley in my wheelchair by a drunken man. I'm telling you to get out. Can't you understand human language? Seeing that I didn't react, Ethan grabbed a nearby goblet and smashed it towards my head. The girl beside him lowered her eyes again, her expression indifferent, like a princess in a castle far from the flames of war. Nonsense. At this moment, a dignified and loud voice entered, accompanied by the sound of a cane. Hearing this voice, my movements, which were meant to dodge, froze, and I allowed the goblet to shatter against my forehead. The sound of glass shattering was piercing, and the people around flinched, rising to greet him respectfully. Old master he. Ethan also paused, suppressing his angry voice. Grandpa. Don't call me Grandpa. The old man was escorted into the room by a group of people, his white eyebrows raised in anger. My He family can't afford a great ancestor with such a temper like you. Dad, don't be angry. A beautiful woman beside him, receiving her husband's gaze, hurriedly stepped forward with a smile. Ethan is young and doesn't understand things. He's just playing around. Young? Old master he didn't buy it, scoffing. Which of these kids from the acrobatic troupe is much older than him, and which of them isn't more sensible? You've spoiled him. The old man walked towards me, his eyebrows and eyes becoming kind again. Child, what's your name? How old are you? I casually wiped the blood from the corner of my forehead and stood up straight. Grandpa, my name is Gingergoo, 17 years old. Ah, good child, I'm sorry you've been wronged. Old master he looked at me with pity, touching my head. Grandpa will have someone bandage you up first, and then make that little brat apologize to you. Why should I apologize? Ethan was unwilling, his beautiful cat-like eyes, perfectly inherited from his mother, narrowed. This kid was flirting with Una first. What's wrong with me teaching him a lesson? As he spoke, he roughly pulled up the girl beside him. Hey, Una, tell me, right? But Una remained indifferent, her vacant brown eyes seemed to be daydreaming. After a long time, she casually nodded, lightly humming, yeah. See? Only then did Ethan let go, looking at me smugly and contemptuously. A stinky acrobat, really thinks he's a Prince Charming. Shut your mouth. Old master, he heavily struck the ground several times with his cane. She's your sister, not your toy. He then lashed out at the stern-faced man in a suit beside the beautiful woman. You're learning to be bad from your father. So arrogant at such a young age, not as steady and proper as this child. What kind of system will he be in the future? But as he roared, old master, he suddenly fell silent, clutching his chest, his face flushed. Dad! The beautiful woman and the man in the suit hadn't reacted yet. But I was already shouting, oh no, does Grandpa have heart disease? Quick, call a doctor. Only then did everyone suddenly respond, and the huge birthday banquet was thrown into chaos. It was only then that my gaze jumped over the chaotic crowd and looked at Ethan. He was dragging Yuna, who had a look of indifference on her face, away from the scene. Not looking at me again, and without any psychological burden. Exactly the same as in my previous life. Except that I could still stand. On my own two legs. 2. The birthday banquet ended unhappily, and the acrobatic troupe naturally returned home. But a few days later, old master, he sent someone to pick me up from the hospital. Child, come over here. In the ward, old master, he leaned against the pillows, smiling and beckoning to me. And as soon as I sat down by the hospital bed, he noticed my swollen cheeks, which couldn't be covered up even with powder. His white eyebrows furrowed instantly, and he said coldly, what happened? Did the troop leader of your acrobatic troupe hit you? I lowered my head, seemingly hesitant, and nodded. The reason was simple, I had completed the performance, but offended an important person. Even if the troop leader had clearly seen backstage that it was the He family's young master who had started the trouble first. Deliberately throwing gardenias at my face, distracting me and the fellow performers below. If I hadn't reacted in time, caught the flower and adjusted the center of gravity of the entire human tower, the worst thing would have been that everyone would have fallen. The stage had no safety measures, which would have resulted in fractures at best, and paralysis at worst. But in the words of the troop leader, my life was cheap anyway. Even if I had died on the spot, would Ethan have had to spend a day in jail? Seeing my silence, what didn't old master he understand? Worthless descendants. He closed his eyes and sighed, wrinkles crisscrossing, as if he had aged several years again. When he opened his eyes again, old master, he had already made a decision. Child, Grandpa invited you here today because there's something else I want to discuss with you. I went to the hospital in the morning, and in the afternoon, the troop leader of the young acrobatic troupe was detained for child abuse. And in the evening, I, along with all my belongings, was sent to the He family. You do have some ability. At the entrance, Ethan leaned lazily against the shoe cabinet, looking down at everything I had brought. Worn-out sneakers, faded old-school uniform, and the only peeling suitcase. He had a lollipop in his mouth, and he sneered without hiding his malice. You wouldn't be cross-dressing, would you? Hooking the old man so that even an iron tree can bloom, he even wants to have a grandparent-grandchild romance. After squatting down to change into slippers, I straightened my back and looked at him expressionlessly. Is your heart always as dirty as your mouth? Hearing this, Ethan's face was immediately covered with ferocity. Say that again, you little. I didn't repeat it, but stepped directly onto the edge of the steps at the entrance, standing at the same height as him. Having trained my muscles and bones to the extreme since I was a child in the acrobatic troupe, Ethan was only slightly taller than me when he faced me at this moment. As for whether I'm a boy or not, I looked down with a meaningful gaze. Want to compare? Ethan was stunned at first, then his face darkened, and he raised his hand and pushed me away violently. Are you sick? I took 2 steps back, and asked, don't dare? Or no confidence? Finally realizing the huge difference between my roguelike performance and the first time we met. Ethan didn't immediately fight back for a moment, and looked me up and down. Heh, as expected, another one who knows how to pretend. You pretended to be well-behaved and honest before, and now that you've achieved your goal, your true colors are exposed. He mocked, but you're not smart enough. You opened the champagne halfway, getting complacent too early. I frowned. What? The old man loves to do charity the most. Our He family sponsors at least a few thousand orphans like you a year, but not even a single digit manages to climb the social ladder. As he spoke, Ethan spat out the lollipop and raised his hand to forcefully poke the candy surface on the top of my head. Even if we take one of you home, it's no different from adopting a stray dog, understand? I swatted his hand away, the force so great that it made a crisp slap. Even if you're raising a dog, it will bite if it's not raised well, and it's not you who's raising me anyway. If it bites, then just beat it to death. It's just a dog's life, who cares? Is that so? Then never mind. Question mark. The tense confrontation took a sudden turn, and Ethan couldn't help but look at me suspiciously. Seeing my ears turning red and my limbs stiffening, he followed my line of sight and turned to the stairs behind him. Just in time to see Yuna, wearing a plain-colored nightdress, walking down from above with a book in her hand. Noticing the gazes of the two, Yuna looked up slightly. Meeting Ethan's gaze, she lingered on me for another second. Coldly, without any emotion. But Ethan exploded like a bomb, grabbing a vase from the side and smashing it. "Get back to your room." The vase shattered on the steps, and shards of glass cut across the girl's slender legs. I immediately grabbed Ethan's arm, frowning tightly and saying, "What are you doing? Isn't she your sister? Get out." As if I had touched a sore spot, Ethan violently shook me off, becoming more and more manic. "Whose siblings with this bitch?" But before he could finish shouting, I punched him back in the stomach. "Speak properly, or don't speak at all." I held up my right hand, my knuckles numb, but my voice was still gentle. "Damn." Ethan slowly twisted his head, which had been knocked sideways by me, and wiped his lips with his right hand. When he saw the blood on it, he laughed. Looking at me again, his eyes were terrifyingly gloomy. "Just a dog, and you actually have the guts." "I'm sorry." My peripheral vision quickly swept over Yuna, and I lowered my head. "I just thought your words were too hurtful." Catching my actions, Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Hurtful? Heh, I didn't know you were so gentle. What are you pretending to be now? A gentleman? A knight?" He suddenly raised his voice, clearly wanting Yuna to hear clearly. "Do you think she'll fall in love with you if you do this?" As if his thoughts had been exposed, I stiffly pursed my lips and buried my head lower. Seeing this, Ethan chuckled loudly, and then casually waved at the stairs. "Come here, Yuna." I hurriedly looked up. "Wait. Be careful." But Yuna had already stepped down the steps covered with debris, her face becoming paler and paler. I reached out to help, but Yuna lowered her eyes and ignored me, walking past me and staggering towards Ethan. "That's a good girl." Ethan casually put his arm around her shoulder, curling his lips, silently declaring his victory and ownership. Seeing this situation, I didn't force it, and naturally withdrew my hand. After all, I knew this result better than anyone else. Not only today, but also tomorrow, and in the future. No matter how much Ethan physically and mentally abused her, Yuna would calmly walk towards him. And the reason was simple: she didn't love him. Or to put it bluntly, she thought she didn't love him. It was as if as long as she didn't love him, it would be a kind of punishment for Ethan, so she could endure it. Until Ethan suddenly realized his mistake and regretted it, ushering in her sweet wife-chasing crematorium. In the end, the two of them would pour out their hearts to each other and resolve their past grievances. Ethan would no longer need to use me, another female, to stimulate Yuna and test her feelings. Yuna would no longer need to ignore me, another female, to show her aloofness and magnanimity. So a stepping stone for their relationship, was not even worth stepping on twice. In the end, even my death became a part of their abusive love play. So, in this second life, as revenge, should I first endure humiliation and steal Yuna's man, capturing Ethan's heart and then dumping him cruelly? Telling him that I had never loved him, and that everything was just acting in revenge? Seeing that I didn't show any frustration or unwillingness at all, but instead looked at him and Yuna with a strange gaze. "Simp." Ethan almost angrily continued to mock me. To perform in the young acrobat troupe, the troupe leader had required me to dress as a boy since I was little. Binding my chest, cutting my hair short, feigning a male voice, and naturally wearing men's clothing. Therefore, in my previous life, Ethan had mistaken me for a boy from the very beginning. And in this life, he was still in the dark. I said calmly, "If you think that being a normal person and respecting women counts as being a simp." But Ethan looked contemptuous, thinking that I was just trying to save face. "Hey, Yuna, you tell him yourself." He tightened his arm around Yuna's neck again, glancing at me provocatively. "Do you think you'd be attracted to a loser like him?" Hearing this, Yuna looked up indifferently, glanced at me, and then lowered her eyes. The first time she spoke, her voice was as light and faint as her temperament. "There's no possibility between you and me." "Yeah, I know." I nodded simply and smiled. "It's okay." I looked down at the thin-soled slippers on her feet again. "But you should take care of the wound on your foot as soon as possible, right?" Whether it was because of the sentence, "it's okay," or the subsequent concern, Yuna looked up again, meeting my smile. She was stunned for a moment, then quickly averted her gaze. It was the first time she had been so flustered. But Ethan didn't notice at all. So I smiled more sincerely. "Revenge? Retribution? No rush. I just wanted to see." After she had experienced truly healthy, warm feelings. Who would still care about his love that was so rotten that even dogs wouldn't want it? 3. Grandpa. He was still recuperating in the hospital, but he had already arranged everything for me meticulously. Besides eating and living in the He family with the He siblings, I was even transferred to the same private school. I looked down at the new school uniform on my body. A men's school uniform. That day in the hospital, I had taken the initiative to confess that I was cross-dressing. and begged Grandpa he to continue to keep this secret from me. Firstly, opposites attract, and I, as an adopted daughter, was different from Yuna after all. Moving into the he family as a boy would reduce gossip and make my situation more comfortable. Secondly, the same sex repels, and I, as a male, might arouse some competitive spirit in Ethan. Finally, I reminded Grandpa he again. For weeks later, in the evening, he had better not go out, especially not by car. After hearing the first few points, Grandpa he was surprised, but he could accept them. Especially the point about encouraging Ethan to compete, which made Grandpa he's wrinkles relax and showered me with praise. But Grandpa he was puzzled by my final ambiguous warning. And I couldn't explain it. How could I say that Grandpa he in my previous life had died in a car accident on that day? At that time, I was lying in the hospital, my lower body without any sensation, and I had no way of knowing more details about the car accident. In fact, giving Grandpa he such a precise warning was a huge risk in itself. Not only would it easily expose my rebirth, but it would even attract trouble and be suspected of having ulterior motives. But I couldn't help it. Whether in my previous life or in this life, I had always been immersed in the malice of fate, and received very little kindness. Therefore, I was deeply grateful for every drop of kindness. Seeing my prolonged silence, Grandpa he seemed to have noticed something and suddenly reached out to rub my head. "Good child, Grandpa promises you that I will definitely not go out that day." He smiled kindly and sincerely. The weight on my head was heavy and steady, but it had nothing to do with status or identity. It was just the weight of a life. The recollection stopped, I put down the chalk and turned around. This private high school did not require students to wear uniforms, and most students wore their own clothes. Like carefully pruned flowers in a greenhouse, precious and delicate. It made me, wearing a proper school uniform beside the podium, even more out of place. All eyes fell on me, some arrogant, some pitying, and not a few contemptuous. But I had long been accustomed to these in my previous performances. I didn't shrink back at all, and scanned the classroom. I happened to meet the eyes of a girl with a high ponytail in the front row who was whispering to the person behind her. The moment our eyes met, I smiled at her. Immediately, the girl with the high ponytail was stunned, her mouth still open from chatting, but her face turned red with a whoosh. "Classmate Ginger Goo is transferring to our class today, so let's sit." The female teacher stretched out a hand to introduce me, her voice very gentle, but her expression was a little embarrassed. Looking around, the seating arrangement in the classroom was obviously based on student wishes. There were opposite-sex classmates at the same table, same-sex classmates at the same table, and naturally, there were also those who sat alone. Like Yuna. As soon as I stepped into the classroom, I noticed Yuna sitting alone in the back row. No matter how noisy the classroom was, she always kept her eyes lowered, reading a book all alone. "Let's sit." The female teacher naturally noticed this too, and was about to wave her hand over. "Teacher. He can sit next to Lily." Just then, the person behind the girl with the high ponytail raised an arm, with a mischievous smile on her face. "What are you doing?" The girl with the high ponytail glared at her friend with a red face, but didn't refute. "Classmate Ginger Goo, do you think it's okay?" the female teacher asked me. I didn't answer immediately, but looked past the front row to Yuna. The book in her hand had been stuck on that page for a long time. The seat beside Yuna was also empty. If I wanted to sit there, it would probably only take a word. However, I withdrew my gaze and smiled at the female teacher, nodding, "Okay, teacher." At the same time, Yuna by the window finally turned the page. It was hard to tell whether it was a sigh of relief or a faint disappointment. Soon, class was over, and the classroom became more lively. But for some reason, no one spoke to Yuna. Everyone tacitly pretended not to see her, and even made a point of going around the desks and chairs she sat on. Like an isolated island in the sea. "What's going on with that?" I asked the girl with the high ponytail, my new tablemate, as if I was curious. Her name was Lily He, she was an only child, and although her family wasn't as powerful as the He family, they were still very well off. "Oh, that's Yuna. Her situation is, a bit complicated." Lily's expression was complicated. I heard that she was adopted, and she's Ethan's non-blood related sister, but Ethan especially hates her. "By the way, do you know Ethan?" I didn't answer, but just looked at her eyes, signaling her to continue. Lily's face turned red again, and she coughed. "Ethan is a popular figure in our school. Because of his family background, many parents tell their children to curry favor with him." She lowered her voice as she spoke, "So if he doesn't like someone, he doesn't even have to do it himself, and there are plenty of people fighting to find trouble. And speak of the devil." Several boys from other classes swaggered to the front door of the classroom. The boy with the earring in the lead shouted, "Hey, tell Yuna from your class to come out." Immediately, the classroom was silent for a second. Yuna lowered her eyes, closed her book, and silently walked to the front door. What is it? The boy with the earring smiled. It's nothing, we're all friends of Ethan. We just came back from playing ball, so can you buy us 5 bottles of cola? Large and ice cold. At first glance, this request seemed like a simple errand. But the large bottles were at least 1.25 L each, and 5 bottles would weigh at least 12 pounds, not to mention they had to be ice cold. Asking a slender girl like Yuna to bring them back, wasn't it just making things difficult for her? But Yuna just nodded, her expression indifferent. Like a porcelain doll that had stifled all emotions. The boy with the earring smiled even more proudly, hooking his arm around his companion's shoulders. Hurry up. My face turned cold, and I stood up. Lily subconsciously wanted to pull me back, but didn't succeed. How pathetic. My tone was obviously angry. But not at those boys, but at Yuna. How long are you going to be a coward? Hearing my voice, Yuna's body trembled slightly, and she lowered her eyes even further. Interrupted, the boy with the earring was unhappy and raised his hand to push me. Who are you? However, he put in the effort, but found that he couldn't push me at all. Even when he looked up. He wasn't even as tall as me. Don't you have hands? I looked down at him. If you have hands, go buy your own drinks. The boy with the earring was immediately enraged. What do you think you are? Who I asked to buy them is none of your business. His companions also chimed in. Look at him, still wearing a school uniform, probably a student on financial aid from somewhere, so tanned, he must have just finished fertilizing the fields before coming to school. The boy with the earring looked me up and down and sneered. Oh, I see. So you're a poor kid, but she's not some rich lady. Even if you're saving the damsel in distress now, you won't be able to become a son-in-law. You're dreaming. Your various annotations and interpretations of me do not constitute even 1/10,000th of who I am, but are a clear view of you. Sanmao said that. Have you heard of it? I said calmly. I don't know what kind of environment you're in that makes you think of only marriage and becoming a son-in-law when you meet everyone. At least my value has never needed to be realized through marriage. I made an encouraging gesture again, but you shouldn't give up on yourself either. Good luck. You. The boy with the earring finally became exasperated. Poor ghost. Hick. You're only good at talking. Is that so? You just said you were playing basketball, right? I tilted my head. Dare to compete? Why wouldn't I dare? But why should I compete with you? If you win, I'll run errands for you for a month, whenever you call. If I win, you'll treat everyone in my class to cold drinks. I pointed to Yuna, please, in her name. Yuna looked up in surprise, and the first crack appeared on her indifferent face. The boy with the earring was stunned, then laughed loudly. Pfft. So you just want to be a hero? Alright, I'll let you lose face enough. If you win, I'll personally treat everyone, but if you lose, you'll be our dog at school from now on. With that, he waved to the tallest and strongest boy among his companions. Howsy, let's go. Let's beat him up. But I stood still. Wait a minute. What, are you scared? No, class is about to start. Agreeing on a time, the boy with the earring and the others swaggered away as the class bell rang. The classmates in the class also returned to their seats, and the last looks they gave me were full of pity. Only Yuna was still standing there. Until I turned to leave, she suddenly grabbed a small piece of my clothes. You don't need to do these things for me, and I won't be grateful to you. I turned my head and saw Yuna looking up slightly, and that crack had been restored to indifference. That Howsy is the best forward on the previous champion team. If you compete with him, you'll only be humiliating yourself. Yeah, I know. I nodded. Anything else? Yuna was stunned, then continued, I'll tell them you can't make it, and if you stay away from me in the future, they won't bother you. But I stopped talking, and just stared at Yuna thoughtfully. What are you looking at? She finally couldn't help but say. You actually have some Sundra attributes. What? Never mind. I smiled. For the game at noon, please look forward to it a little more. 4. When it comes to things other than studying, no group is more active than students. News about the bet spread like wildfire, and there were more people coming to watch than expected. Hey, poor ghost, have you ever seen such a big basketball court? The boy with the earring provoked. Don't be so scared that you pee your pants later, and then make excuses that you didn't play well. There were no lack of the boy with the earrings classmates among the onlookers, and they all roared with laughter upon hearing this. But I didn't pay any attention, first getting used to the feel of the basketball, then throwing it directly from beyond the three-point line. Thump! The basket scored. All laughter choked, and there was a moment of silence on the basketball court. It was just luck. The boy with the earrings face was slightly embarrassed, but he quickly regained his confidence. I'll let you enjoy yourself first, and then I'll beat you up until you cry for your parents. Howsy, go. After all, the number of people on both sides was what it was, so naturally, we couldn't organize a regular game. So the rules were very simple, 1v1, 5 balls, the one with the most points wins. I won the toss and got to attack first. Housie threw the ball to me and sneered, "Come on, dash." Thump. 1-0. Housie was stunned for a moment before turning to look at the basket. Another long shot scored. The speed was so fast that the echo of his "come on" was still reverberating in the air above the basketball court. The boy with the earring was so angry on the side that he was spitting everywhere. "Housie, are you a log? I told you to go up there to stand like a steak." Scolded until his face turned green, Housie glared at me, "So you're really a shooter?" And he was stupid enough to let a shooter shoot a wide-open shot in front of him. Reopening his arms 1 meter away from me, Housie lowered his center of gravity and posed in a defensive stance. He smiled hideously, "But your good luck ends here, I'm going to get serious." I nodded, "Oh." Restarting the ball, Housie went straight up for close defense this time. But I still made a 3-point shooting motion. Realizing the pattern, Housie's face showed ecstasy, and he rushed up without hesitation. No one expected that the next second, I would suddenly gather the ball and accelerate to the right to break through. Housie missed his tackle and could only turn back to watch me score a layup. Thump. 2-0. Clean and neat, a swish through the net. "Are you serious?" I asked with sincere doubt. "I am possible." Again. Provoked by my sincerity, Housie roared with red eyes, grabbing the ball and throwing it directly at me. I caught the ball and saw that he was emotionally charged, charging over like a brown bear. I simply faked another shot, but this time I changed direction and broke through to the left. Swish. 3-0. "Want to keep going?" I asked. Even if the back was 3-2, I would still win. "Impossible, you're cheating." Housie's face was distorted, "I'm the best forward. How could I possibly lose?" "You must be cheating. You're enough. Aren't you ashamed enough?" At this moment, an impatient voice interrupted. It was Ethan, walking over lazily with his hands in his pockets. And behind him was Yuna, her head lowered, her eyes faintly red-rimmed. Clearly, she was the one who had invited this great Buddha. "It's just a friendly match, anyone who pays can be rated best. Ethan scoffed, "It's okay to fool others, but don't fool yourself, you idiot." Swept by his contemptuous gaze, Housie's face flushed purple, and he clenched his fists in anger but dared not speak. Ethan glanced at me again. "Not bad, where did you learn to play?" And in that gaze and tone, there was unexpectedly a hint of respect. Making me wonder for a moment if I was just imagining things. Ethan frowned. "Are you deaf?" I slowly shook my head, "Never learned." Ethan rolled his eyes. "All right, it's too much to keep pretending. Your shooting ability is not bad, although it hasn't reached the top level yet, it's more than enough to play in a youth team. But what surprised me was your ball handling skills. It's impossible to reach that level without professional training." Hearing these words, Yuna looked up in surprise, but looked at Ethan in front of her, not at me. I imagine the content of her surprise at this moment is the same as mine. So Ethan also has times when he doesn't go crazy and doesn't get manic, and talks properly. Even in my previous life, when Ethan learned that I was actually a girl and used me to provoke Yuna's jealousy, his expression was far more considerate than it was now, and his voice was far gentler than it was now. But at that time, his eyes never looked at me directly. And he never cared what I said or did. It was as if I was just a little ballerina in a music box that he could wind up and I would spin for him endlessly. Couldn't escape, and didn't matter. But at this moment, based on the medium of basketball ability, Ethan recognized male ginger goo. The me reflected in his eyes was finally a real person. Someone with an equal soul like him. Seeing my prolonged silence, the boy with the earring couldn't hold back and jumped up and down. "Since your level is good enough to beat the youth team, why did you propose to compete with us? Isn't this deliberately bullying people?" I really didn't professionally learn basketball. I first answered Ethan, but I've learned other things: jujitsu, bull balancing, tightrope walking, juggling. You get beaten for making a mistake, and you die if you fall. I picked up the basketball and threw it to the stunned Housie. "Perhaps its use is just entertainment for you, but for me, it's the ability to make a living that I practice day and night, risking my life. Besides..." I walked towards the boy with the earring, tilting my head provocatively. "So what if I'm doing it on purpose? You can bully others, but others can't bully you." "You." "I?" The boy with the earring was so angry that his face turned red, and he wanted to get angry, but Ethan kicked him in the butt from behind. "Whining, just admit it when you lose. What are you barking about?" Ethan cursed, and added another kick. "Treat everyone, large bottles of ice drinks, everyone gets a share, get lost." Seeing Ethan speak, the boy with the earring didn't dare to offend him, so he had to swallow his anger and drag his companions towards the store in frustration. Instantly, the whole audience cheered, and some even applauded. Seeing this, the corners of Ethan's mouth turned up slightly, and when he glanced to the side, he happened to meet my gaze. He immediately straightened his lips and glared at me fiercely. "What are you looking at? Have you seen your father?" I said oh, and honestly shifted my gaze. Then it landed on Yuna. "You bastard. I'll dig out your eyeballs." 5. Not on the college forum. 1L if I don't get into the top 5, I won't change my name. Who isn't paying attention in class and browsing the forum? Oh, it's me, then never mind. 2L Lily wants to sleep. Doesn't anyone think the style of this forum page is too old? Can't we update it? 3L secretly in love with the head teacher. Old and safe. 4L the world's #1 matchmaker princess. I have some gossip, do you want to hear it? 5L pink mushroom. Gossip? Tell it quickly. 6L the world's #1 matchmaker princess. It's about Ginger Goo from class 1. I reasonably suspect that he likes Yuna. 7L pink mushroom. Really? 8L Lily wants to sleep. Speechless. Stop spreading rumors here. 9LAA Master Locksmith Wong. Who understands? I've always felt that Goo has a kind of androgynous beauty. Although he's a bit tanned, the more you look at him, the more handsome he is, not greasy at all. 10L the world's #1 matchmaker princess. Laughing to death, who's spreading rumors? I'm from class 1, and anyone with eyes can see Ginger Goo's double standards, okay? 11L staying up late to read novels. I understand. It feels like Ginger Goo is polite and calm in front of other people, but only in front of Yuna is he like a sunny puppy, frank and flaunting his favoritism. Don't be too obvious, you little juice. 12L the world's #1 matchmaker princess. Right. I'm dying from shipping them. Handsome men and beautiful women are really friendly to my eyes woo-woo. 13L Lily wants to sleep. Speechless. 14L the world's #1 matchmaker princess. You're speechless again, sleeping sister? 15L Lily wants to sleep. What's it to you if I'm speechless? Ginger Goo isn't such a shallow person. 16L the world's #1 matchmaker princess. Oh, shallow. Could it be that you're secretly in love with him, jealous? 17L Lily wants to sleep. Without finishing reading, I closed the forum and went to the bathroom to look in the mirror. Am I that obvious with my double standards? At this moment, my phone vibrated. Yuna had accepted my friend request. Yuna, group assignment. Docs. Me, received. Me, the theme the teacher gave us is the original dream. What do you plan to write about? Half an hour later, Yuna sent a message, then withdrew it. But I was in front of my phone the whole time, without being distracted. Me, novelist. Yuna. Me, your original dream was to be a novelist, right? Yuna, used to be, not anymore. Me, so, have you ever written a novel? 10 minutes later. Yuna, MHM. Me, I'm very curious, can I know the general plot? Another 10 minutes later. Yuna, it's just a science fiction novel. The female lead is seemingly in love with different people, but secretly she's planning a revenge. In the end, all the male leads give their hearts, but the female lead always stays conscious. In the end, the revenge is successful, and she goes away alone. Completely unexpected plot. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Just as I was about to type a reply, my phone ran out of battery and shut down automatically. By the time I plugged it in and turned it on, it was 5 minutes later. Buzz. 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 The messages that had come in while the phone was off came in a string. Yuna, it's very cliched, very boring, I know. Yuna, laugh if you want. Yuna, don't text me anymore. I seem to have accidentally triggered her. Me, sorry, my phone just ran out of battery and shut down. Me, so this is a story about betrayal and revenge, wrapped in a disguise of romantic entanglements? I think it's quite interesting. I'm already looking forward to reading it. 3 minutes later. Yuna. Yuna, really? Me, really, the fact that you would write this type of story completely took me by surprise. I can't wait to see how you'll push this story to a climax and ending. Yuna, but actually, I haven't finished writing the ending. Me, why? Yuna, procrastination? Me, procrastination is just another form of perfectionism. You've set very high standards for yourself, but deep down you're afraid of failure, is that it? Yuna, maybe. Yuna, it's also possible that, whenever I tell people I want to write novels, I'm always just ridiculed. Me, I don't care what others say or think. If needed, I'll prove them wrong. Me, your voice is important, your story is important, write down what's bright in your heart, don't be scared by their gossip. Yuna. Yuna, are you always so good at comforting people? Me, depends on the situation, sometimes I do well. Me, sometimes I do even better. 6. Yuna wasn't originally planning to laugh. But when she wanted to exit the chat page, she accidentally clicked on Ginger Goo's profile. See you tomorrow? That was Ginger Goo's WeChat nickname. Yuna stared at those 3 words for a long time. The corners of her lips curved up slightly without her even noticing. What are you looking at? Smiling so happily. Until a voice suddenly rang out from behind, Yuna trembled in fright, and her phone was snatched away. Ethan grabbed the phone, flipping through the chat history, his expression growing darker and darker as he read. Yuna subconsciously lowered her head, her body stiffer than ever. Finally, when Ethan's gaze left the screen, he actually smiled. But Yuna felt that his eyes were clearly about to burn. Chatting so happily with him. If I had come any later, would you have already decided on what to name your children? Ethan said with a light laugh, his beautiful cat eyes curving up, sparkling. But the next second, the phone slammed onto the ground with a thud. Yuna then felt a tightening on her neck, and Ethan was strangling her. Yuna, do you have any shame? Sending and withdrawing messages, playing hard to get, having a lot of fun, right? Are you going to die if you don't seduce men? You only just met him and you're pouring out your heart and soul? Just because he helped you? Did such a small favor capture you? Are you that hungry, that desperate for a man? A fire-like turmoil churned and scorched in her stomach. Yuna felt like she was suffocating. Clearly, before this, she had experienced and endured even heavier humiliation and more difficult situations. But she had never felt so wronged and desperate as she did this time. Why, not to me. What? After a hysterical roar, Ethan seemed to mutter something again. But his voice was too small and too hoarse, and Yuna didn't want to hear it clearly. She knew Ethan hated her, resented her. He said that her family had killed his father's dear brother, the uncle who had raised him since he was a child. So he was living to torment her, to make her as eternally painful and eternally lost as he was. So she sealed off all her emotions, not wanting to involve anyone. And resistance. I'm telling you, if you leave the He family, leave me, you're nothing. Cruel words stabbed into her internal organs like sharp knives. Then holding the hilt, watching you smile and spin. Resistance was meaningless. She was just an orphaned girl whom Grandpa he had forgiven and taken in, adopting her into the He family to live a life of ignominy. Other than that, she had nothing, she couldn't even protect herself, let alone others. So Ginger. Her life was originally a still sea that would not ripple, but he was the drop that made the sea wave. Gradually recovering from the dizziness of oxygen deprivation, Yuna's eyes focused, and she realized that Ethan was holding a pink notebook in his hand. Her novel. On WeChat, she had lied to Ginger. She was still writing a novel. Each stroke, hidden under the pillow by the bed, was her deepest secret. Ethan had just broken into her bedroom, rummaging and smashing, shaking out her secrets. And he was now reading the new content she had written last night in a mocking tone. She had seriously compared liking and love, having possessiveness towards him was liking, believing he was trustworthy was love, feeling unhappy if she couldn't be with him was liking, forgiving his mistakes was love. However, when she took it seriously to the end, she discovered that, just like the characteristics of the 12 constellations, the concepts of liking and love could also be confused at any time. But she still stubbornly felt that there was a difference between the two. Love is like looking directly at the sun, while liking is like looking up at the moon. One is fiery and dazzling, the other is comfortable and joyful. And he is the moon. Her moon. Reading to the end, Ethan's tone gradually became devoid of emotion from sarcasm, until the end, a terrifying silence. The calm before the storm. Are you referring to Ginger Goo? Finally, Ethan asked that question, his voice terribly cold. Yuna only felt that all the blood in her body had been drained, but she still used all her strength to shake her head. No. She tried to look directly into those dark pupils, and explained in a trembling voice, that's just a novel plot, it has nothing to do with reality. Is that so? But Ethan smiled again, a sinister smile, like a devil about to eat people. I don't care, anyway, no matter who you like, you're my dearest sister. You can't leave me when you're alive. And you'll be buried next to me when you die. 7. Me, depends on the situation, sometimes I do well. Me, sometimes I do even better. After sending the last WeChat message, I put down my phone, put on my noise-canceling headphones, and continued to pick up the test paper. In my previous life, I was supported by the He family, but because I relied entirely on a wheelchair for mobility, and because I had to hide the reason for my disability. I had always been homeschooled, and I hadn't been able to participate in the regular college entrance examination. Therefore, after being reborn and entering a real school, my grades were basically at the bottom. Fortunately, the early bird catches the worm, and hard work can make up for shortcomings. After I finished writing the last essay question and just took off my headphones, I heard a rattling noise from downstairs. I opened the door, but heard Ethan's voice faintly coming from the living room. Are you referring to Ginger Goo? I walked out of the room, my hand on the wooden stair railing. I saw that the entire villa seemed to have just been forcibly demolished, with debris everywhere. Ethan was standing in front of the sofa, his condition obviously not right, and a circle of red marks was printed on Yuna's neck. Looking up and seeing me, Ethan smiled mockingly, fashionably late, a distinguished guest. He shook the crumpled pink notebook in his hand at me. My dear sister's masterpiece, do you want me to read it to you? I frowned. What? Ethan's expression was somewhat distorted with jealousy. He squinted his eyes at me, his eyes deep. You don't know? I thought she would tell you all her innermost thoughts, don't you think so? Yuna's expression was still her usual indifference. She lowered her eyes, not saying a word. Ethan chuckled, and raised the pink notebook. Isn't that right? Okay, since it's so shameful, then let's tear it up. Hey! I wanted to rush down the stairs to stop him. But with a sharp rip sound, countless words fell as white paper rain. Countless nights of hard work were reduced to ashes. Standing blankly on the last few steps, I looked angrily at Ethan. What the hell is wrong with you? But Ethan seemed to have released his stress, his expression relaxed, and he looked at me lazily. The person involved isn't anxious, why are you meddling? He turned to Yuna on the sofa again, right? Great, writer. Whatever. Uttering these two words lightly, Yuna stood up and walked out of the living room without looking back. Ethan smiled even more wantonly. You see. He turned his head back, and his collar was suddenly grabbed by me rushing over. You guys really, completely rotten. I stared at him word by word. Ethan was pulled closer to me, and was stunned for a moment. Then those cat eyes smiled crookedly, over praise. A punch. His face was knocked crooked. Ethan reined in his smile, cursed, and raised his hand to strike back at my abdomen. 2 punches, 3 punches, 4 punches. Veins popped out, and nosebleeds splattered. The two wrestled together, not like people, but like 2 crazed beasts. No one dared to step forward to dissuade them, fearing that they would be bitten and have a piece of flesh torn off if they got too close. Sometimes, I really think, you and Yuna are quite similar, both the same. Ethan pinned me to the floor, his face bruised, panting. The same? Do you want to know what it is? I twisted with all my might and pinned his arms behind him. Spit it out. Ethan used his skill to break free again and kicked my abdomen hard, both the same pretense. I rolled on the ground, a taste of blood in my throat, then got up and charged towards him. Does that make you glorious because you're rotten inside and out? Ethan retched in pain, then laughed loudly, laughing and retching, also telling me to use more force. Sick. 8. That day, my and Ethan's mutual beating almost scared everyone else in the villa to death. Afterwards, the butler wanted to report to Ethan's father and drive away the troublemaking me. But Ethan stopped him and forbade anyone from publicizing it. And Ethan's attitude towards me had obviously changed. If it was respect the first time on the basketball court, then this time it was? During breakfast, Ethan suddenly sat down across from me, propped up his arms and stared at me with his cheek in his hand. Weird closeness, strange overtures. Hey, ginger goo. He suddenly opened his mouth. I didn't want to pay attention to him and focused on memorizing my English vocabulary. Yuna isn't feeling well, you help her ask the teacher for leave later. Only then did I look up, looking towards the stairs. Okay, what's wrong with her? Lowering my head again, I happened to meet Ethan's eyes, dark, deep, and complicated. Heh, when it comes to liking her, you really don't know how to hide it at all. His tone was still jealous and sarcastic, but he didn't suddenly lash out like a hypermasculine. I didn't say anything and took a sip of soy milk. Ethan smiled. Hey, ginger goo, I think I'm starting to like you a little. I choked suddenly, spitting out a mouthful of soy milk. Seeing this, Ethan disgustedly withdrew his arm while revealing a smug smile. Got you. I clenched my fists. If you want to fight, just say so. Suit yourself if you want to be late. Ethan rolled his eyes. Don't overthink it, not that kind of like. He shrugged again. To be honest, you're quite interesting, it's like we met without knowing each other first. I suddenly discovered that, as the same gender, you're quite charming. As the same gender, I'm quite charming. But as the opposite gender, I'm just a plaything. Not just like, even love, Ethan had said to me in my previous life. In front of Yuna, he knelt on one knee in front of me and proposed to me. What kind of feelings did I have for Ethan at that moment? Heartbeat? Gratitude? Attachment? All of them. In the end, it was all about begging for protection in a desperate situation. Even if the other party was the person who caused me to be in this desperate situation. Knowing it was exploitation, but unable to escape the situation. As a woman on the receiving end of love, I had lost my legs, and was too weak. Now that I was living again, I had regained my initiative and still possessed my legs. Did I still need his liking and love? Seeing my silence, Ethan continued. Before, I said you were quite good at pretending, including at the very beginning. I thought you were the kind of person with a belly full of schemes, trying every means to sell misery and gain sympathy, even though you could have dodged the goblet I threw, but you had to take it head on. Hearing this, I looked up slightly, not expecting that he had seen it at that time. Was that unexpected? I've seen a lot of those people. They fawn on those with power and influence on the surface, but in the background, they're full of resentment, as if their poverty and misery were caused by the rich, and the whole world owes them. Like the old man, he did charity and sponsored so many orphans, but those people ate and took, and in the end, they still resented him in their hearts, coveting all his wealth. That greedy face was really as ugly as it could be. But you're different from those people. Ethan deliberately paused while speaking, grinning with a bright smile. You're much dumber than them. Me? He spread his hands and curled his lips. After all, you even dared to hit me twice, and to say that you're a villain who curries favor with the powerful, that's a joke. But at least, you dare to love and hate, dare to put it into action. Unlike those ghost servants who say one thing and do another, you can be considered to have some personal charm. I finally opened my mouth. So, what do you want to express? Tisk, are you really pretending to be stupid? Can't you understand? Ethan's expression had a moment of anxiety and unnaturalness, but he suppressed his anger and said, my meaning is, I can treat you as, a friend, allow you to stay in the He family. He then added, the premise is that you're not allowed to approach Yuna again. Does this count as an overture? A formal armistice treaty, a lowered posture of friendship invitation. Living another life, I've really seen a ghost. Ethan raised his eyebrows and looked at me, seemingly waiting for me to be grateful for the bit of kindness he had mercifully released. But I didn't reply immediately, staring at him for a long time before saying seriously, Ethan, you're actually in the closet, right? Ethan's face immediately darkened. Are you looking to die? I shook my head. I cherish my life, so I'm not interested in acting out burning winter with you. Putting away the vocabulary book, I slung my shoulder bag. Perhaps you've never been loved properly, so you don't know how to love others. Those who are taken a liking to by you are unlucky. As for you, you'll be punished. After saying that, I went out to school, leaving Ethan alone still standing in place. 9. But as soon as class reached noon, something happened outside. Grandpa he died. The moment I saw this news, my hands and feet went numb, as if I had fallen into an ice cellar. Clearly, the death calamity 4 weeks later had been successfully overcome, and clearly, Grandpa had not taken a car out like he had in my previous life. Why, would something still happen? Child, as soon as I saw you, I felt that we were destined. Seeing you get hurt because of my wicked grandson, I always felt indebted. Why don't you come to our house? Grandpa will take care of you, so you won't have to suffer anymore in the future. The scene in the hospital that day was still vivid in my mind. The smiling old man, his eyebrows and hair were white, but his body was strong, his spirit was full, and he was still recuperating in the hospital. How could he suddenly die of a heart attack? Was it fate, or murder? The moment the cold 2 words emerged in my mind, I shuddered fiercely. If Grandpa's deaths were not natural on both occasions, if both were murders. And soon, my guess was confirmed. Yuna was acting strangely. Ever since the novel incident that day, Yuna had started avoiding me and Ethan. Every day, she tried to come home as late as possible, either going to the library to study or going to the hospital to accompany Grandpa he. Therefore, last night, Yuna saw Grandpa he for the last time. Wait a minute. Hearing my call, Yuna's footsteps on the stairs obviously stumbled for a moment. Then she quickened her pace even more, as if the me chasing behind her wasn't a person, but a ghost. Very strange. Ever since she came back from the hospital last night, Yuna had been somewhat muddled, as if she had lost her soul. After that, she had not left her room, and this morning, she had asked for leave and didn't go to school. Using Ethan's reason during breakfast, that she wasn't feeling well. Yuna. I strode up 3 steps, grabbing her wrist from behind. Yuna gave a jolt, stiffening without turning around. What exactly happened? Grandpa's death wasn't an accident, right? What did you see? Yuna didn't answer, twisting her hand trying to break free, but her strength was too weak. On the contrary, she pulled herself so much that she was almost unable to stand steadily, swaying like a willow in the wind. I softened my voice, almost begging, I don't want to force you, but this is about human life, and it's about Grandpa's life. Grandpa he is my benefactor, I must figure it out. But Yuna just shook her head, her eyes lowered, her face pale. She clearly knew something, but she refused to say it. Because she was afraid, or was she escaping something? I slowed my breathing, patiently comforting her. Listen to me, I'm sure Grandpa's death was deliberately planned by someone. That person has deceived everyone, and is still at large. I must find that person and avenge Grandpa he. Yuna, no matter what happened, you can tell me, I'll take responsibility. Believe me, okay? I won't hurt you, I just want the truth. But Yuna was still struggling, biting her lips until they turned white. Yuna. I couldn't help but raise my voice, putting more strength into my hand. What exactly are you hiding? How long are you going to stay mute like this? Don't you have your own thoughts? Speak. Yuna gasped in pain, and finally turned her head, her eyes red-rimmed. You don't understand anything. She murmured, her body trembling violently, suddenly breaking down. You clearly don't understand anything. Can you stop bothering me? Seeing Yuna like this for the first time, I was stunned for a moment, my eyes widened. Yuna herself was also stunned, then quickly lowered her eyes. Don't interfere in the He family's affairs anymore. It's not something you can change, you can't do anything. And I just stood there, and after a long time, I withdrew my hand, letting it hang by my side. Then silently turned around and walked downstairs. One went up. One went down. Never to intersect again. Ginger goo. Yuna subconsciously reached out her hand. I'm sorry. And I paused slightly, turned my head, and smiled at her. Go fuck yourself. 10. You had a fight with her. Without even knocking, Ethan pushed open my bedroom door. It wasn't even a question, but a direct statement. Clearly, not only at home, but also at school, everywhere was filled with his informants. Ethan crossed his arms and leaned lazily against the doorframe. I thought you could be so much more of a gentleman, but in the end, you still cursed people. My thoughts on the problem were interrupted, and I turned my chair around, expressionless. Do you want to come and be cursed too? Don't. Ethan made a gesture of surrender. After all, I'm not a girl, and you not only curse people, but you also beat me. I looked at him. It has nothing to do with gender, it's just that some people insist on communicating with fists. Your mouth is getting more and more poisonous. Ethan scoffed, rolling his eyes halfway. I'm saying, is it really okay for you to be so arrogant while living under someone else's roof? With your biggest backer gone, aren't you afraid that you'll be kicked out tonight? The reason I'm in the He family is because of Grandpa He. I'm not staying here for your kindness, you can kick me out at any time, and I can leave at any time. I stood up and walked towards him. Paralyzed in my previous life, I stood up in this life, and I only needed to look straight at the people I once looked up to and depended on. I couldn't help but laugh. Look, I still have legs. Seemingly feeling inexplicable for my sudden smile, Ethan narrowed his eyes dark and unclear. You're so happy that you can leave? He sneered. What about Yuna, can you let her go too? My smile retreated, my expression slightly dimming. Seeing this, Ethan felt a little pleased, and then stabbed me. But that's right, that was originally your wishful thinking anyway. Do you know why Yuna refuses to tell you anything? Ethan looked at me, as if he wouldn't continue if I didn't ask. I frowned, but couldn't help but say, why? Because from the bottom of her heart, she hates your existence. I froze. Ethan smiled even more brightly. You were right before, maybe I don't know how to love people, and it's unlucky to be taken a liking to by me, so Yuna was so eager to find a warm son, which is why she started to get close to you. But she soon found out that you're not just a son, you're simply a scorching sun. Clearly you're a penniless poor kid, but you can live so brilliantly every day, so full of vitality. Why? What are you? It's simply blinding. Those cares and comforts that you thought were concern were actually poison to her, clearly reflecting her cowardice and humility like the clearest mirror. But Yuna is a girl after all, and more reserved, so she asked me, her brother and your friend, to tell you a word for her. She's not Sundra, she really hates you, is annoyed by you to death, and has never trusted you. As he spoke, Ethan patted my right shoulder, a pendant-like sting. Get lost. 12. Not on the college forum. 1L if I don't get into the top 5, I won't change my name. Family, who understands, the closer it gets to the end of the semester, the better the forum is to browse, tearing up. 2L the world's #1 matchmaker princess. The sky has fallen. The CP I was shipping seems to have collapsed. 3L secretly in love with the head teacher. Which pair? Ginger Goo and Yuna from class 1? 4L Lily wants to sleep. 5L pink mushroom. Gossip? Tell it quickly. 6L the world's #1 matchmaker princess. Yeah, I don't know if the two of them had a conflict, but now Ginger Goo goes around Yuna when he sees her. It makes me feel more uncomfortable than if I broke up. 7L pink mushroom. Really? 8L AA master locksmith Wong. I found out too. If in the past Goo's double standards was only being enthusiastic towards Yuna, now it's the exact opposite, only being indifferent towards Yuna alone. The difference before and after is simply heartbreaking. 9L Lily wants to sleep. 10L the world's #1 matchmaker princess. Sleeping sister, what are you speechless about again? Ginger Goo, who you're secretly in love with, is ignoring Yuna, you must be overjoyed. 11L Lily wants to sleep. Heh, sorry, I'm not as narrow-minded as you think, I just think it's quite interesting. 12L pink mushroom. Explain in detail. 13L Lily wants to sleep. Don't you guys think that Yuna used to pretend quite a bit? Whether it was being targeted by Ethan or being isolated by the people in the class, she always had a indifferent, not my business look. What about now? 14LAA Master Locksmith Wong. I think I understand a bit. Since Gu stopped paying attention to Yuna, it feels like Yuna is finally panicking, and can't be indifferent at all. I've never seen her like that. 15L staying up late to read novels. How does it feel like a wife chasing crematorium? From being chased to chasing back, what should I do? I'm starting to feel a bit good about this. 16L Lily wants to sleep. My previous feeling about Yuna was probably the same as Ginger Gu, pitying her misfortune, angering her for not fighting for it, so now I really want to keep watching to see what Yuna will do. I didn't want to go to self-study class, and I didn't want to stay in the classroom. Ethan randomly found an empty laboratory, propping his legs on the podium while playing games. After getting tired of playing games, Ethan glanced at the campus forum again, feeling more and more annoyed the more he read. So he threw away his phone and kicked the boy with the earring next to him. I'm thirsty. The boy with the earring, who was entering the final circle, was interrupted, and his first instinct was to curse. But when he turned his head and saw that it was Ethan, he could only grit his teeth and drag the housie next to him to the store. Glancing at the two people's resentful backs, Ethan sarcastically tugged at the corners of his mouth. If it was Ginger Gu, his fist would already be slamming into his face at this time. Ethan then froze, forcibly tugged down the corners of his mouth, and felt that he was simply sick. Why was he being so concerned about a love rival? But, besides Ginger Gu, which of the other people around him dared to treat him with sincerity? The He family, inheritance, power. Were these illusory things that frightening? Afraid to the point where they could desperately suppress even the most basic emotions of being human. Everyone smiled at him. And no one ever truly smiled at him. The empty and boring sense of irritability attacked again. Ethan was about to get up when the door of the laboratory was suddenly kicked open from the outside. Ginger Gu? Ethan subconsciously raised the corners of his lips. But unfortunately, it wasn't. It was Yuna. Ethan was slightly stunned, almost thinking that he was seeing things. Yuna? And Yuna had already strode over. What did you say to Ginger Gu? What? I'm asking, what did you say to Ginger Gu? Never heard before high-pitched tone, never seen before strong emotion. All of them came from Yuna? The other followers were also dumbfounded. Was this still that Yuna who was indifferent to everything? Was he seeing a ghost? With great difficulty, Ethan's first reaction was to feel offended. He casually grabbed an alcohol lamp and smashed it over. Shut up. What are you shouting about? Instantly, glass shattered and alcohol splashed. But Yuna wasn't scared. She kicked the suction rope away with one foot, and her voice grew even louder. You're the only one with hands, right? She then laboriously raised a few chairs beside her and smashed them over. You're the only one who can smash things, right? Seeing this situation, the shocked crowd could no longer sit still and scattered like frightened birds and beasts. Seeing a ghost, the indifferent Yuna had gone crazy. Ethan narrowly dodged the chair that was being smashed at him, frowned and roared, Yuna, are you fucking sick? Yes. I'm sick. You should have known I was sick a long time ago. It's all you who forced me to do it. Aren't you satisfied yet? Yuna cried as she shouted, actually laughing. That beautiful little face smiled with gritted teeth, her eyes bloodshot. I'm asking what the hell you said to Ginger Gu. Who allowed you to say those things? Her forehead was broken by the leg of a stool, and the severe pain instantly numbed Ethan's brain. Impossible. That was absolutely impossible for Yuna. His indifferent and bland, porcelain doll-like sister, who had no feelings. Could it be that she was possessed by some shrewish wild ghost? Or was he having a nightmare? The sense of absurdity at that moment made Ethan even forget to be annoyed, and the whole world seemed unreal. And Yuna was still out putting. She grabbed everything she could lift and smashed it at Ethan, regardless of whether she was hurting the enemy 800 and herself 1,000. Damn it, she was crazy, she was really crazy. For Ginger Gu. Because Ginger Gu really wasn't paying attention to her. Because Ginger Gu had really given up on her. Ethan suddenly remembered the forum post he had just browsed. Don't you guys think Yuna used to pretend a bit? Always with an indifferent, not my business look. Since Gu stopped paying attention to Yuna, it feels like Yuna is finally panicking, and can't be indifferent at all. So, she was really panicking. So, she was really anxious. Just for Ginger Gu? Just for a Ginger Gu. Ethan was about to bite his gums until they bled. His arms and cheeks were cut by flying glass. But compared to that hot and stinging pain, the burning sensation in his heart was 1,000 times worse. Ethan felt that his whole body was shaking, as if he was about to lose something important forever. However, when he opened his mouth, his words were still arrogant and mean. What? Our great writer has fallen in love with him. Sometimes I really can't believe that you have a human brain between your two ears. Yuna held up her bloodied hands, reflected in her pale and thin eyebrows and eyes. She tilted her head and chuckled, a terrifying contrast, and also the ultimate stunning. Are you deaf or blind? Can't you tell, or am I not shouting loud enough? Sharp-tongued and sharp-witted. That Yuna who was indifferent to everything had turned into this after being stimulated. Or was this her true character? Ethan heard his heart pounding wildly. Was it anger, or was it fear? It was as if a character that had always been bound by the setting had suddenly awakened self-awareness. Violently breaking free from the author's control, running wildly in the blank wilderness outside the plot. Unable to trap, unable to catch. You would never guess what she would do next. Laughing to death. How long have you known Gingergoo? And how much has he paid for you, that you like him so much that you want to die and live? Ethan heard his own voice, without the expected rage and frenzy. Using the accustomed humiliation and attack to crush her self-esteem. And even weakened to the point of almost trying to salvage things. I thought you were different from other girls. I didn't expect you to be so love-brained too, not like you at all. Awkward and embarrassing salvaging. Ethan could feel that the former Yuna had a good impression of him. The hazy attachment of childhood sweethearts was superimposed on the debt and guilt of that incident. Like a silkworm cocoon, Yuna's heart was tightly bound to him. It couldn't be called love, but she couldn't leave either. But Gingergoo's appearance was like a light and nimble cocoon-cutting knife. Gradually eroding his position in Yuna's heart, until he was completely stripped away. Regret, unease, and a strong sense of crisis. Enduring the stinging pain on his forehead and all over his body, Ethan softened his voice again. Yuna, Gingergoo isn't as good as you think, and besides, if he really liked you, how could he give up directly after being provoked by me? Wake up a bit, there's still time to turn back. However, facing his questioning and salvaging, Yuna only looked over indifferently, lightly uttering 4 words. You don't understand shit. 13. Yuna, Gingergoo. Yuna, Ethan is lying to you. Yuna, I never hated you, and I didn't want you to get lost. Yuna, Gingergoo, I know you're in the room. Yuna, can I come in and talk to you? Yuna, this time I'll tell you everything. Yuna, Gingergoo. Yuna, I know I was wrong. Yuna, please don't ignore me. Yuna, please. The phone placed to the side kept vibrating. It wasn't until I finished this side of the problem set that I took off my headphones and first glanced at the rain outside the window. I had asked for leave at school during the day, and now it would be terrible if the people who were getting out of school forgot to bring an umbrella. Picking up the phone again, I opened the message. The indifferent Yuna had suddenly become so talkative. And scrolling down to the end. Yuna, Gingergoo. Yuna, I know, you're actually a girl. Yuna, from the beginning. Seeing this message, my brow twitched slightly, and I typed a reply. Me, and then? And the other side replied almost instantly. Yuna, actually, I'm also reborn. 14. Opening the bedroom door, Yuna was standing at the door. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her whole body was soaked wet. And the first sentence she said to me, looking up at me, was, "Why, did you give me that bouquet of flowers?" 15. Yuna was also reborn. Just like me. Even, the point in time of her rebirth was earlier than mine. In her previous life, Yuna's parents cordially invited Ethan's uncle to go sea fishing. As a result, the boat malfunctioned, and Ethan's uncle could have escaped, but he drowned while saving Yuna's father. The only survivor, Yuna's mother, also died of depression not long after, leaving 10-year-old Yuna alone in the world. Ethan's uncle was Grandpa He's eldest son, and also Ethan's father's dear brother. He had never married and had no children, and had always treated Ethan as his own son. Ethan and he also had a father-son-like relationship, and the impact of his death on Ethan can be imagined. Yuna had always believed that it was her family who had killed Ethan's uncle. And felt extremely guilty towards Grandpa He and Ethan. Because before going out to sea, she had been clamoring to catch a pink fish for her to keep. After the accident, she thought over and over again, would her parents have sailed on the planned route to fulfill her wish, which ultimately led to, it was all her fault. It was only right that Ethan hated her, tormented her, and took revenge on her. What's more, Ethan was also her childhood sweetheart and first love. So she would endure it. As long as she closed her eyes and plugged her ears, that would be fine. As long as she stayed out of it and didn't care about anyone, she wouldn't be in pain. Later, I appeared, an innocent juggling teenager, who was crippled by Ethan. When Ethan found out that I was actually a woman disguised as a man, he used me to provoke Yuna's jealousy. At that time, Yuna did feel uneasy and lost. She realized that she might be suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. At the same time, she also knew that I was just a small toy that Ethan was playing with in his spare time. Sharing the same illness, but powerless. All she could do was ignore it as much as possible. Until Ethan deliberately proposed to me in front of Yuna. At that moment, Yuna didn't even know why she was crying. Jealousy, panic, fear of losing him, these emotions she felt for Ethan were real. But the pain of the shattering of the last bit of dignity in her heart was also real. Yes, she was just that incompetent, falsely virtuous, and self-righteous. That good-for-nothing was completely hopeless. After that, Ethan told her that I had chosen to move out on my own. It was a long time before she learned that I had actually been kicked out by Ethan overnight. And my tragic death. And then, Yuna accidentally discovered Ethan's father's conspiracy back then. The murderer who harmed Ethan's uncle and her parents was Ethan's own father. The reason behind it was cliched and straightforward, to fight for inheritance rights. But what made Yuna even more despairing was that Ethan had known about all of this from the beginning. Even so, he chose to pretend not to know, letting her bear a lifetime of guilt and a sense of sin. Ethan said he loved her, but was this really love? Why was that love more twisted and more heart-wrenching than hatred? Unable to accept reality, Yuna completely broke down, and in a daze, crashed into a vehicle. Then, she was reborn, a few days before Ethan's 17th birthday. Yuna felt nothing but confusion about this. She didn't know what she should do after being reborn. Should she take revenge? And how to take revenge? The first thought that popped into Yuna's mind was still to use love to take revenge. Putting on an act, so that Ethan would never get her heart, suffering for the rest of his life. Then, it came to Ethan's 17th birthday. I walked towards her. 16. Perhaps it was due to the attraction of similar souls, that the moment you caught the bouquet of flowers thrown by Ethan, and didn't fall down from the human pyramid like you did in your previous life, I realized that you had also been reborn. For some reason, at that moment I began to feel fear, an unprecedented fear. I was afraid of you, afraid to look you in the eye, afraid that you would notice me and take revenge on me. I also thought that you would definitely take revenge, like snatching Ethan away, and cruelly retaliating against me, making me experience the pain you had in your previous life. But why did you give that bouquet of flowers to me? Why were you so gentle? I even basely speculated that that might also be your deceptive trick, the purpose of which was to create a kind image in front of Ethan, so as to win his heart. However, you still dressed as a man, and didn't try to please Ethan at all, but really, were guarding me. Why? I asked myself this question all the time, and I didn't know how to react. Clearly I was so selfish and foolish, clearly you and I are both girls, clearly you have also been reborn. Why are you still so kind to me? I couldn't help but want to get closer to you, but the closer I got, the more inferior and frightened I felt. Until later, I suddenly discovered that the place Ethan occupied in my thoughts was getting smaller and smaller, and even as long as you were there, I couldn't remember anything about him, or about love and revenge. My mind was only filled with the thought that if I was too close to you, who was currently dressed as a man, Ethan might do more crazy things out of jealousy. So I thought that the only thing I could do to protect you, was to ignore you, just like in my previous life. But I was terribly wrong, I was really wrong. Ignoring was just running away, and running away can't solve any problems. Grandpa, he in this life also. I saw it with my own eyes, at the hospital, Ethan's father. Patricide. I was extremely scared, and extremely confused. I just wanted to hide, to be at the mercy of others, so when you kept asking me at that time, I suddenly emotionally collapsed, and said very excessive things, making you completely disappointed in me. Even now, I don't know what I'm thinking, I just truly felt for the first time that the sky had fallen. You're the best person I've ever met. It was you who gave me the purest, most selfless redemption. If even you are going to give up on me, then what's the point of me living again? I suddenly began to feel a fear I had never felt before. And an unprecedented anger. Towards everyone, towards myself. I developed endless anger. Why did he, what right did they have? How dare they? Ginger Goo, I know that in this life and the previous life, you have never truly forgiven me, and I don't expect you to forgive me either. I only ask you, give me a little bit more anticipation. Let me prove it to you. 17. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see Yuna's proof. A week after that, I was kidnapped. My eyes were blindfolded, and everything was pitch black. My hands and feet were tied tightly, and I was thrown on the ground. The ship beneath me swayed in the water, and the sticky sound of mixing cement could be heard not far away. That was about to become my burial place tonight. An orphan, like duckweed without roots. And also secretly raised by the He family, such a large family. Whether I lived or died, it was like someone was tightly covering my mouth and nose, unable to make a sound. What's more, Grandpa He, the only person in this world who cared for me, my only support, was also gone. Knowing too much, killing me to silence me. Sinking into the sea with a belly full of filth. There was no simpler way to end it. Soon, the mixing sound stopped, and heavy footsteps approached me. A rough hand grabbed my hair and dragged me up from the ground while cursing. Damn Scarface, he always makes me do all the dirty and tiring work. Humph, you kid are pretty sensible, knowing there's no way out, you don't make a fuss, you just quietly wait to die. The person's voice was rough, but there was a bit more sympathy in his tone. I'm saying, at such a young age, why did you get involved with a wealthy family? People, the more money they have, the more muddy they become, and people who want to wade into this muddy water will eventually be sunk into this water too. He finally sighed. Well, reincarnate early and change to a good family, say it, what last words do you have? And I struggled to raise my head, thought for a moment, and then said, be careful, behind you. What? Bang! The steel bar hit the back of his head with all its strength, just as he had turned halfway. The dull sound of the huge object heavily falling to the ground, along with the sound, made one's eardrums go numb. I fell back to the ground in an instant, hearing the other accomplices in the boat being alarmed, and running out with their weapons in hand. Who? Someone's causing trouble? Over there. I saw him. Wait, a kid? Forget about kids or adults, if we're discovered, we'll all die. Chase him. Hearing the chaotic footsteps receding, I struggled to wriggle on the ground. At this moment, another cold hand grabbed my wrist, so cold that I gave a jolt. Ginger goo. But it was Yuna's voice? I'm sorry, it's all my fault for harming you. I'm late. She cried, her hoarse voice sounded like it had just been burned, crying and desperately using a small knife to cut the rope on my hand. Now, the one saving me was Yuna. Then, who was it that had lured people away? The ropes that were tied around my hands and feet were unexpectedly strong, and the small knife couldn't cut through them for a while. Yuna was so anxious that she was trembling all over, her sobs growing louder. I'll work out. From tomorrow, I'll start working out. I'll build a body of muscles, and tear these damn ropes apart in an instant. If we can still live until tomorrow. I said with a forced smile. We can. We definitely can. Finally cutting off the ropes on my feet, Yuna forcefully helped me up. Didn't you just say, be careful behind you? Did you know that we would come to save you? I will definitely save you. That was just me talking nonsense to scare him. I pulled off the blindfold with my almost numb hand, and finally saw the disheveled Yuna in the night. Whether or not we can live until tomorrow, but today, I'm very happy. Yuna smiled, large tears rolling down, and nodded forcefully. Yeah, me too. I had been tied up for too long, and I had completely become a burden to Yuna in the escape. But Yuna's hand, tightly gripping mine, had never let go for a moment. However, the time was still too short. Soon, the bait who had lured people away was caught, and that group of people returned to the boat. Damn, you dare to escape? The leading man spat, and the scar on his chin became even more hideous. Don't come over. We've already called the police. Even though Yuna was trembling all over with fear, she still desperately tried to block in front of me, trying to deter Scarface. But I knew that she was lying. When I clearly saw the bait who had been twisted by the hands and feet and pressed to the ground on the side, I understood that Yuna didn't have time to call the police at all. Let go. Let go of me. Being suppressed on the ground, Ethan struggled and roared, you dare to touch them and see what happens. From the moment I was kidnapped to the information about my location. Apart from the mastermind. Probably only the son of the mastermind could be clear. If Ethan found out that I was kidnapped and planned to act as a hero and rescue me himself, and Yuna was just brought along temporarily, then it was very likely that they hadn't called the police. Firstly, the real murderer was Ethan's own father, and calling the police was indirectly tantamount to confessing. Secondly, that was Ethan's personality, too arrogant and too naive. He greatly underestimated the cruelty of this group of desperados. Ho, what a crazy kid, alright. Scarface laughed loudly. He picked up the steel bar on the side, tapped it in his palm with only 4 fingers left, and then showed a fierce look. I'll cripple your legs first, to see if you're still crazy. You bastard. Ah! The sound of bones shattering was clear and terrifying, and Ethan's legs instantly folded at an inhuman angle. The river wind diluted the bloody smell, and only the teenage's heartbreaking screams remained on the boat. You're crazy. Finally regaining consciousness from the pain and shock, a bodyguard with blood flowing from the corner of his mouth squeezed out a voice. He was obviously one of the manpower that Ethan had brought, but how could someone who took a salary be able to defeat someone who was risking their life? Plus, he wasn't familiar with the terrain on the boat, and at this moment he was beaten with blood all over his mouth, and his shout was vague. Do you know who he is? He is Ethan. The son of General He. Instantly, Scarface's laughter froze, and the surrounding air solidified. Looking at Ethan on the ground, who was about to pass out from pain, the accomplices were at a loss. Brother Scar. What should we do? Scarface's face was also ashen. What's going on? The father wants to kill someone, and the son wants to save someone, damn it, are you playing me? As he spoke, he spat a thick mouthful of phlegm on the ground, his eyes revealing murderous intent. Then let's just do it once and for all, and pull off a big one. Kidnap this young master he too, and tear off a leg to send over to that man with the last name he, and if we can't get the ransom, we'll sink them both. Hearing these words, a large blank space and terror intertwined on Ethan's face, who still had the last bit of consciousness remaining. Like a fledgling bird that dared to chirp before its wings were full, he clearly recognized his weakness and the cruelty of the world for the first time. Even the nest had been overturned by someone, and lying on the ground, he could no longer fly. If possible, I would like to admire his despair at this moment for a while longer. But the red and blue lights that were speeding towards us lit up everyone's faces in an instant. The loud sirens also broke the silence like the dawn breaking, and reverberated on the river. Ethan didn't call the police. But I did. 18. After being sent to the hospital, I, on the contrary, became the fastest to recover. Una didn't suffer much injuries, but was just too frightened and still needed to rest and observe. And Ethan goes without saying, his legs were broken by the steel bar. Even if he recovered in the future, there was a high probability that he would be left with a limp. Has he woken up? Seeing that it was me, the newly changed bodyguard at the door no longer stopped me, nodded and let me in. I saw Ethan lying on the snow-white hospital bed, his eyes staring straight at the ceiling. Ethan. I walked to the bed and dragged a chair over to sit down. Are you still not planning to talk to me? The person on the bed didn't move, silent like a stone statue. No longer thinking, without emotion, and losing all arrogance and fighting spirit. That once domineering and arrogant teenager had suddenly become so quiet that it was unsettling. I was silent for a long time, and when I spoke again, I gradually let go of the voice that I had been suppressing all the time. Ethan, if I told you that I actually am a girl, what would you say? 1 second. 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. Those numb and chaotic black eyes suddenly trembled, and then slowly turned to me. Ethan stared at me, his pupils shrinking. Impossible. Finally, that raspy and unpleasant voice was the first thing Ethan had said in so long. Why is it impossible? I took off my loose coat, revealing my slightly undulating figure after no longer binding my chest. Here's my physical examination report, with the gender column, do you want to see it? At that moment, I saw countless emotions such as shock, confusion, and unease quickly piling up on Ethan's face. He opened his mouth, looking at me as if he were looking at an alien. In the end, Ethan closed his mouth, lowered his eyes, and fell into silence like snow. I'm sorry. After a long time, he said hoarsely. The first apology I had waited for in 2 lives. Unexpectedly, my heart didn't feel the relief or pleasure of finally getting revenge. Instead, a fire of anger was burning in my chest. Who are you apologizing to? In my previous life, he had crippled me, trapping me in a wheelchair forever, and robbing me of my freedom. But I didn't dare to show any resentment, and wholeheartedly relied on him, flattering him. Even though I knew that his kindness to me was just exploitation, a small pastime between him and Una. I could only pretend not to know, endure the humiliation, and carefully eke out a living. Until he got what he wanted, and ignored my repeated pleas, sweeping me out the door on a rainy night. I never got an apology, not a shred of guilt. But now, I could still stand and run freely. Every day I lived according to my heart, replying to insults and punching him when I was annoyed, and even made him directly lose a pair of legs. But he was apologizing to me instead? Seemingly surprised by my question, Ethan raised his eyes again. To you, can't I? Yes, of course, you can. I just felt unfair and pathetic for myself in my previous life. Ethan's gaze landed on me and then moved away as if electrocuted. His expression was strange, constantly changing like a color palette, and his voice didn't know which tone to use. I really didn't know you were a girl, before. Stop. I interrupted him. I feel like what you're about to say will discriminate against 2 genders, and they'll both be quite hurtful, so don't say it. Ethan fell silent again. But this time, he was restless on the hospital bed. I stood up. Now that things have come to this, what I want to tell you is this, I want to completely be myself again. If there's nothing else, I still have to go to night study. Wait. I turned my head back. Do you hate me? What do you mean? Before, maybe it was because of jealousy, because you were being so attentive to Una for no reason, and Una was close to you, and later my father I don't understand, anyway, that, can we still be friends? I was stunned, and then laughed, looked up at the watch, it's a bit late. Goodbye. 19. On the second day after Una was discharged from the hospital, she, in the capacity of the He family's adopted daughter, voluntarily stood up and identified He's father for deliberately murdering Grandpa He. And many years ago, murdering his own dear brother and her parents. As soon as this news came out, the world was shocked. As small as the campus forum exploding, everyone who knew Yuna felt that they were either seeing things or hallucinating. As big as the news media was in chaos, fratricide and patricide, a struggle between wealthy families, the kind of exciting and bloody thing everyone loved to see. In contrast, his father was unusually calm. Faced with the interview, he bluntly said that Yuna was just an ungrateful wretch. Saying that this was just a child's ignorant fantasy, and she just needed more education when she got back. After all, there was no evidence, just empty words. It was a pity that compared to calm, no one was calmer than Yuna. Yuna had evidence, and even found witnesses. Who told men to always be noticed, while women were always ignored? When everyone focused their attention on me, male ginger goo, trying every means to monitor me, control me, and block my mouth. Yuna got ample time and space to collect evidence based on her memory. No one could have imagined that Yuna, who had always been obedient and cowardly since stepping into the He family, relying on Ethan like a creeper. For the first time, her voice was like a thunderous blow, catching Ethan and his father completely off guard. And a bigger and more shocking blow was one of Yuna's witnesses. Grandpa He. The living Grandpa He. Child, Grandpa invited you here today because there's something else I want to discuss with you. What Grandpa He said in the hospital that day had to do with this. From beginning to end, Grandpa He had been faking his death, everything was within his and my plan, deceiving everyone, the purpose of which was to lure the snake out of its hole. Just because there were rumors that Grandpa He was preparing to make a will to donate 2/3 of his property, his father was so anxious that he planned to strike first. Although Grandpa He was old, his mind was still clear, unusually clear in the world, and donating his inheritance was not just a rumor. Grandpa He said that instead of leaving it to support wastrel descendants and being remembered for all eternity, it would be better to use this wealth in a more valuable place. Let's just say that I, alone, will try to atone for the sins of my descendants as much as possible. Grandpa He, who appeared in front of the camera again, had completely white hair, and was crying tears of old age. At this point, with all the crimes combined, his father could no longer turn the tables. All the evil consequences of the first half of his life would start to bite back crazily from now on. Along with it, Ethan was also bitten back. The once invincible young master of the He family had now become a rat running across the street. Even though he was now in the hospital, the campus forum had been flooded with posts of denunciation, just waiting for him to return to school to settle all the old and new scores together. The heat surrounding the school's invisible bullying also soared as a result, which immediately caused social discussion. When a reporter interviewed Yuna, she smiled and took out a pink notebook that had been pieced together with countless tapes. I think this should be the best proof. Even if I tried hard to sew it back together later, the cracks are still there. In addition, the novel I originally created inside is about to be published, so I welcome everyone to buy and read it when it comes out. We're not allowed to advertise in interviews. The reporter couldn't help but reveal a look of contempt, and for a girl like you, to pursue fame and fortune so opportunistically, don't you think you're being too greedy? Yuna just smiled and shrugged. She would no longer be intimidated by other people's gossip. After finally finishing this interview, I closed my phone and helped the driver move the luggage into the trunk. Ginger goo. At this moment, a man's voice broke through the rain curtain and reached my ears. I turned around, and saw Ethan in a hospital gown sitting in a wheelchair, almost completely soaked by the heavy rain. What a familiar scene. It was almost like returning to my previous life. Just the characters had switched, and the purpose was completely different. I know. Yuna told me everything. Ethan was drenched and disheveled, and his voice was lower and hoarser than the last due to the rain. I held up an umbrella and looked at the driver. Thank you for your hard work. You can go into the car and take shelter from the rain first. I'll be there after I say a few words. After the driver got into the car, I looked at Ethan. So? His eyes were dark and blue, and his eyes were full of blood, ginger goo, in my previous life. I'm sorry for you, I messed everything up. You were right, I had never been loved properly, so I didn't know how to love others at all, and could only try to gain attention and attract attention by constantly hurting others. Sorry. I looked down at my watch. It seems like it's a bit late to clear your name now. I'll miss the plane that Grandpa He booked for me. Ethan was stunned, clenching his trousers with both hands, and lowered his head painfully. I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, can you stay? He raised his head, begging with red eyes, give me another chance to make it up to you, okay? Whether it's in the capacity of a friend or... I couldn't help but laugh. No, big brother, who are you trying to move again? Yourself? Since you know about the things in your previous life, then if you have the ability, don't heal your legs, and spend your whole life in a wheelchair atoning for your sins, otherwise one day I'll come back and personally break them. Hearing this, the last bit of light in Ethan's eyes dimmed, and he slowly lowered his head. Okay, I promise you. I turned around to pull open the car door, and was about to close the umbrella. What about Yuna? You're leaving like this, can you let her go too? Ethan suddenly shouted from behind, looking extremely ugly like a trapped beast. My movements paused, I tilted my head slightly, and said expressionlessly. What she is rushing towards is the responsibility that she must bear alone. Whether that will be a painful struggle or a hearty adventure depends on her. Besides, I haven't forgiven her yet. 20. She thought that probably many, many years later. When she became an old woman with white hair, all her teeth had fallen out, and her face was wrinkled. She would still deeply and clearly remember that day. After her new best-selling book signing event, she heard someone speaking to her from afar. Here, this bouquet of flowers is for you. They match your dress very well. Her head turned sharply towards that long-lost and familiar voice, her heart skipping a beat with anticipation. She was standing there, smiling at her. She couldn't help but walk towards her. From a big step, to a trot, and then to a sprint. The light footsteps emitted a thunderous cheer along with the rapid pulse. And she reached out and steadily wrapped her arms around her waist, effortlessly lifting her up, spinning. Nose to nose, corner of the mouth raised to corner of the mouth, laughter and tears intertwined. So that the flowers in her hand were smashed all over the sky, and the fluttering petals were surrounded by the words excerpted from the Alfeng. Her life was originally a still dead sea, and she was the drop that made the sea wave. Although the water drop has disappeared, the ripples it caused will never disappear. Until the endless waves roll in, getting bigger and bigger, never stopping. Finally, Ichongkwa, the city wall built by her over a long period of time. Let the salty seawater completely wander. Becoming hot and joyful tears.